They don't speak, they don't leave footprints, and yet they are always watching. Across declassified files, lost journals, and forbidden zones marked on maps that fade into whiteness, one name keeps resurfacing: the Ice Wall Guardians. Towering figures shrouded in silence, said to patrol the outer edge of the world. Some say they are remnants of a civilization erased by the flood of time. Others whisper they are not of this earth at all. Sentinels forged from the very ice they guard. Every civilization has a threshold, a place it was never meant to cross. In medieval maps, it was the mare incognitum, the unknown sea where dragons were drawn to warn sailors away. In our age, that frontier is Antarctica, sealed by treaties and weather, and by something that may not want to be found. Admiral Byrd's cryptic journals, strange no-fly zones, blurred satellite images, all point toward an unseen intelligence watching from the edge of the frozen south. Tonight, we trace the echoes of those who vanished chasing its mystery. We listen to the wind that howls across the Ross ice shelf, carrying stories that no government dares to confirm. This is not the history you were taught. This is the history that watches you back. Welcome to Deformed History. If you're drawn to stories like these, the ones that live in the shadows between what we see and what was made to disappear, feel free to like and subscribe only if it feels right. And let me know in the comments, where are you watching from, and what time is it for you right now? I love seeing our little map of watchers light up around the world. It begins with the sound of wind, an endless howl that seems to carry memories instead of air. Long before satellites drew clean white circles around the poles, explorers called Antarctica the edge of creation. In 1841, when Sir James Clark Ross first sailed into the fog of the Southern Sea, he thought he would find a continent of promise, something to chart, claim, and name. Instead, he found a wall, 150 feet high, stretching across the horizon like a barricade built by gods. The Ross Ice Shelf, as it would later be called, was not a landscape. It was a command. It said, "This far, and no further." The men who stood on deck that day swore they felt eyes on them, something beyond the ice, watching, patient, waiting for them to turn back. They couldn't explain it, so they didn't. But that moment, silent and cold, was when the first whispers of the Ice Wall Guardians were born. Over the decades, expeditions came and went. Most returned with frostbite and fractured minds. Some never returned at all. On the maps they left behind, Antarctica was marked simply as the Great Unknown. But the unknown has gravity. It pulls the curious toward it. In 1946, that pull caught one of America's greatest explorers, Admiral Richard Evelyn Byrd. His mission, Operation Highjump, was supposed to be a military exercise, 4,700 men, 13 ships, and planes fitted with experimental gear. Officially, they were testing logistics in extreme cold. Unofficially, they were chasing something that had already seen them coming. Byrd's own words, spoken softly in a post-expedition interview, still echo like an unsolved equation. There is a land beyond the South Pole, as big as the United States, that no one has ever seen. For most, it sounded poetic. For a few, it was revelation. Because how could there be more land beyond the pole when every map on Earth ended there? Either Byrd had seen something impossible, or he had been shown it. At that same time, a strange theory began to spread across the whispers of radio waves and coffeehouse debates: the flat Earth theory. Its believers claimed Antarctica wasn't a continent at all, but a massive ring of ice encircling the entire world. The ice wall, they said, kept the oceans from pouring into the void. And if that wall existed, someone or something must be guarding it. To them, the Guardians were not myths. They were law enforcers of a cosmic border. Their existence explained every forbidden flight path, every restricted zone, every explorer who vanished under a sky with no storms. But the Guardians refused to stay trapped inside conspiracy. Soon, they crept into another framework. The hollow Earth theory, a belief older than science itself, whispering that beneath the crust of our planet lies another realm, vast, lit by an inner sun, and home to beings older than mankind. According to the faithful, Byrd didn't just encounter a barrier of ice. He found an opening. And what waited beneath the Antarctic plains was not emptiness, but a civilization protected by sentinels of impossible scale. Those who read his alleged secret diary swear it tells of an aircraft guided, not forced, into a valley hidden under miles of ice, where green land and glowing domes rose from mist. Byrd wrote of beings tall and pale, their eyes glowing with a quiet intelligence, speaking directly into his mind, warning him of humanity's self-destruction and urging peace before it was too late. Whether the diary was genuine or not, its words resonated with something deep in the human imagination. The fear that we are children wandering through someone else's house. The years that followed were filled with strange accidents. Airplanes crashed without distress calls. Radio transmissions dissolved into static. Scientists at remote bases reported figures in the fog, tall silhouettes that melted into white whenever approached. Once, during the polar night of 1965, a Chilean research crew radioed panicked reports of massive humanoid shadows circling their camp. Their distress call was cut short. By morning, the snow around the tents was smooth, untouched, no footprints, no signs of movement. Only the trembling voice of the last surviving researcher, recorded hours later, saying, "They walk but do not leave tracks." Skeptics dismissed these stories as illusions, a trick of light and loneliness in a place designed to break the mind. But the reports didn't stop. Pilots, soldiers, even whalers described similar visions, enormous white figures watching from afar, vanishing when noticed. Some swore that electronic devices malfunctioned the moment these beings appeared. Compasses spinning madly, engines dying mid-air, cameras freezing as if the cold itself was a warning. Then came the story of the Ningen. Early in the 2000s, Japanese whaling ships began encountering something vast beneath the ice. Described as 90 feet long, with pale, human-like limbs and a face disturbingly similar to our own, the creature would rise silently from the depths, hover just beneath the surface, and then vanish into the black. The sailors named it Ningen, meaning simply human. Those who saw it never forgot. Those who didn't swore it was a hallucination born from exhaustion. Yet the most unsettling part wasn't its shape. It was the feeling that the Ningen was not curious about us. It was ensuring we stayed where we belonged. Piece by piece, the image of the Guardians became clearer. 7 to 12 feet tall, skin so pale it shimmered blue, hair like frost spun from wind, and eyes that reflected light like those of wolves. They rarely attacked, but always watched, keeping distance yet never losing sight. They appeared most often during whiteouts, when storm and horizon became one. It was as if nature itself worked with them, conjuring fog and snow to shield their presence. Some who saw them up close described the air vibrating, as though their bodies emitted a low hum that made the ground quiver. Others felt their thoughts invaded, simple words in their minds. You do not belong here. Even their silence feels deliberate, almost sacred, as though to speak would break the contract between watcher and intruder. And perhaps that's what they are. Not monsters, not aliens, but keepers of an ancient pact, the last defense line between mankind and something the Earth itself wishes to keep secret. When you stand on the edge of the world, amid the endless white, the mind plays tricks. The horizon curves downward, the compass trembles, and the wind carries whispers that sound like language. Maybe the Guardians are real, or maybe they are the Antarctic's way of protecting its solitude. Either way, one truth remains unshaken. Beyond the last human footprint, something watches back. Something tall enough to touch the storm, quiet enough to erase its own trace, patient enough to wait for the next intruder who dares to cross the wall of ice. Every story about the Ice Wall Guardians eventually leads to Admiral Byrd, the man who saw too much and spoke too little. After Operation Highjump ended abruptly in 1947, Byrd returned to the United States with eyes that seemed older than before. Official reports claimed the expedition had been a success, but whispers from crew members told a different tale. Some said their planes were chased by glowing discs that moved faster than anything made by man. Others described strange lights descending over the ice, performing maneuvers no human pilot could survive. Byrd himself mentioned craft that could fly from pole to pole at incredible speeds. His words were buried quickly under military silence, but the echoes refused to die. Those who studied his case began to wonder, if the Guardians truly existed, were they responsible for the glowing crafts? Were these discs not machines at all, but living extensions of the beings beneath the ice? Sentient instruments designed to patrol the skies as their creators guarded the ground? What terrified the men of Operation Highjump was not the cold, but the realization that Antarctica might not belong to them. It belonged to something else entirely. Then came the treaties. In 1959, 12 nations signed the Antarctic Treaty, an agreement that declared the continent a zone of peace and scientific research. On paper, it was a triumph of global unity. In practice, it locked away an entire continent under an invisible curtain of secrecy. No military bases, no mining, no private claims, no exploration beyond pre-approved zones. What could unite superpowers during the Cold War, if not fear of something greater than both? Some historians claim the treaty was written to protect the environment. Others, more quietly, say it was written to protect us from what lives there. Byrd died in 1957, taking most of his secrets with him. But over the following decades, the stories didn't fade. They multiplied. Scientists stationed at remote research posts described power outages during clear weather, compasses spinning madly, and the sense of being observed. They spoke of figures seen standing on distant ridges, so still they seemed carved from ice, and yet they vanished between one glance and the next. Radios caught bursts of interference that, when slowed down, sounded eerily like rhythmic pulses or speech. The official explanation was magnetic anomalies. But anomalies do not stare back. In 1965, the Chilean incident brought the myth into daylight. A team of researchers near the Antarctic Peninsula reported large silhouettes circling their camp after sunset, humanoid shapes too tall and too slow to be human. The distress call that followed was brief, frantic, cut off mid-transmission. When rescuers arrived days later, they found the camp intact, food frozen in mid-preparation, but no trace of the team. Not a single footprint. Only the radio log remained, the final entry written in trembling Spanish. They come from the ice. From then on, secrecy grew thicker than the snow itself. Governments began monitoring Antarctic communications, censoring images from satellites, and restricting access to unexplored zones. Decades later, digital sleuths would notice strange blurring on satellite maps, patches where resolution dropped suddenly, as if someone had intentionally obscured the view. The world was told these were data stitching errors. Yet those same coordinates matched areas Byrd's logs had once described as unfathomable voids. By the late 20th century, reports of humanoid entities began to resurface, but now with a technological twist. In 1997, a U.S. Navy pilot broke protocol by straying past a no-fly zone near the pole. Moments later, his instruments failed. Two glowing orbs appeared beside his jet, maneuvering with impossible precision. They didn't attack. They escorted him out. When he landed, he was detained, interrogated, and silenced. Later, he would secretly tell friends he'd been guided away, not threatened, as if the orbs had been enforcing some invisible boundary. Stories like his gave birth to a darker question. Had human governments struck a deal with the Guardians? The theory was simple, but chilling. After Operation Highjump, world powers realized they couldn't fight what lived beneath the ice. Instead, they chose diplomacy. They promised secrecy in exchange for safety. The Antarctic Treaty wasn't about science. It was a peace pact. And if that's true, then every restricted zone, every environmental protection clause, is part of a silent truce maintained for decades. Then came 2016, a year when, for a brief moment, the frozen veil seemed ready to lift. On U.S. Election Day, Secretary of State John Kerry flew unexpectedly to Antarctica. The official reason was climate research, but skeptics saw timing too strange to ignore. Why leave Washington on the most politically charged day of the century to visit ice and penguins? Some whispered he wasn't visiting scientists at all, but representatives of something non-human beneath the ice. That same year, Russian Orthodox Patriarch Kirill also traveled to the South Pole, the first in history to do so. He blessed a small chapel, but many wondered if his true purpose was to sanctify something ancient recently unearthed. Even astronaut Buzz Aldrin couldn't escape the pattern. His sudden evacuation from Antarctica, followed by online rumors that he had seen something pure evil, fanned the flames. Though his supposed statement was debunked, the coincidence remained unsettling. A man who once looked upon the moon's desolation now called Antarctica more alien than any world I've known. Stranger still were the patterns of flight. Certain corridors over Antarctica became permanently closed. Pilots who tried to deviate from approved paths reported sudden magnetic disruptions, as if the air itself rejected intrusion. Some speculated that hidden electromagnetic fields, perhaps generated by the Guardian's technology, shielded access points beneath the ice. And then came whispers of the bases, the forbidden installations that never appeared on official maps. One of the oldest tales spoke of Base Tuabasen, a secret Nazi stronghold built beneath the ice in the 1930s. The story claimed the Nazis discovered tunnels leading to warm caverns, powered by geothermal energy, where they established hidden laboratories and encountered beings who offered knowledge beyond human science. Some said the war didn't end there. It retreated underground. Others argued the Guardians destroyed it, erasing all trace except rumors and fear. During the Cold War, both the United States and the Soviet Union constructed research bases suspiciously close to ancient magnetic anomalies. McMurdo and Vostok stations became centers of myth. When Russian scientists halted drilling into Lake Vostok just before breaching its surface, they cited environmental concerns. But insiders whispered that their instruments detected artificial signals beneath the ice, patterns too ordered to be natural. Perhaps the Guardians had stirred. Perhaps the warning was received. What makes the Guardians terrifying is not just their power, but their restraint. They do not invade. They do not conquer. They simply guard. And in that stillness lies the greatest mystery of all. If they were enemies, there would be war. If they were allies, there would be contact. But there is only distance, an enforced boundary written in frost and fear. It's as if the earth itself appointed them keepers of a truth too heavy for human minds. In the end, all stories circle back to the same haunting image, a wall of ice rising like a fortress at the edge of the world, and behind it, shapes that move with purpose. Maybe they are watchers from another realm. Maybe they are the last survivors of an age erased from memory. Or maybe they are what the planet becomes when it decides to defend itself. One thing is certain. Whatever waits beyond that wall is not asleep. It is listening. It always has been. There's a peculiar silence that clings to Antarctica, one so thick it feels alive. Sound travels differently there. A man's voice vanishes into the white without echo, as if the air itself swallows every secret before it can be heard. It's in that silence that the strangest stories are born. Stories of doors opening in the ice, of tunnels that breathe warm air, of lights that move like living thoughts under frozen miles. Scientists call it geothermal activity. Explorers call it something else. They call it the breathing of the Guardians. Every culture that's ever dreamed of the ends of the world imagines Guardians, figures that mark the threshold between worlds. In Norse myth, it was Heimdall, the watchman of the gods, guarding the bridge to Asgard. In Sumerian tablets, it was Apkallu, half-divine beings who preserved forbidden knowledge after the flood. Even in the Old Testament, giants known as Nephilim were cast into the depths of the earth, chained in darkness as punishment. What if these ancient myths were not metaphors, but fragmented memories of the same reality, one that still exists beneath the Antarctic ice? According to the Hollow Earth believers, the Guardians are descendants of those ancient watchers. Not extraterrestrial, but ultra-terrestrial, born from this planet long before our recorded history began. When the surface was scorched by cataclysms, when floods erased continents and fire redrew coastlines, these beings retreated underground, sealing the entrances behind glaciers. They became caretakers of an inner world, while humanity began anew above. To them, we are the forgetful children, curious enough to dig, but not wise enough to stop. In 2002, a U.S. Navy SEAL, using the alias Brian, spoke of a mission that fits this idea too closely to ignore. He claimed his unit was sent to investigate a magnetic anomaly deep in the trans-Antarctic mountains. What they found, he said, wasn't magnetic. It was biological. Giant, pod-like structures embedded in ice, each housing a colossal humanoid figure, 15 feet tall, encased as if in hibernation. Their skin was pale blue, their chests plated with ridged armor that seemed grown, not forged. Before his team could take samples, higher-ranking officers arrived by helicopter, sealed off the area, and ordered silence. Within days, the cave was filled with explosives and collapsed. Brian disappeared a year later. For years, such accounts were dismissed as internet folklore. But in 2018, a leaked satellite image showed something remarkable. A circular depression over 2 miles wide, hidden near the mountains Brian described. Officials called it a collapsed ice dome. Others saw it as proof, a frozen gateway to something more. The internet named it the South Portal. Strangely, the image was removed from public archives within 48 hours. What terrifies scientists isn't what's been seen, it's what's been measured. Antarctica emits strange low-frequency vibrations, infrasonic waves that cannot be explained by wind or tectonic movement. Seismologists detect them every few months, like heartbeats from the deep. They call it ice resonance. But the intervals are too regular, the pulses too controlled. It's as though something immense is moving slowly beneath the crust. Breathing, perhaps, or waiting. Those who've lived there say the continent has moods. Some nights the air hums as if charged. Compasses falter, electronics flicker, and then everything stops. The world holding its breath. One scientist, stationed at Vostok in 1999, wrote in his diary about a sound like a cathedral organ under the ice, an immense vibration that seemed to come from below. He compared it to a message too large for human ears. Days later, his team abruptly halted drilling into Lake Vostok, claiming environmental concerns. He resigned and vanished from public life. His last email simply read, "It's not a lake. It's a lid." Such stories merge with older ones, the Nazi expeditions of the late 1930s. Officially, they mapped an area known as Neuschwabenland. Unofficially, they returned with crates of rock samples that no geologist could identify. Some say they built a hidden base called 211, deep within natural caverns warmed by underground heat. What's more unsettling is the possibility that the Nazis might have found something already there, something ancient. Whether they worshipped it, studied it, or feared it, no one knows. What's certain is that after the war, both American and Soviet missions began appearing in those same coordinates. Rival powers who distrusted each other suddenly became united by one obsession: Antarctica. In modern times, the silence has turned digital. Satellite maps blur the same regions. Thermal scans show heat signatures where none should exist. And when independent explorers attempt unauthorized journeys, they are intercepted swiftly, sometimes by foreign military vessels that shouldn't even be there. It's as if the world's powers are guarding something too fragile or too dangerous to be disturbed. What could demand such secrecy? Maybe the Guardians are not just protectors. They are the protected. If they are the descendants of a forgotten species, still slumbering beneath the ice, then the treaties, restrictions, and blurred coordinates make perfect sense. Humanity's rulers would rather guard the secret than face the question it asks. What if we are not the first intelligent race on this planet? The myth grows heavier when you consider the strange behavior of those who've been there. John Kerry's and Patriarch Kirill's 2016 visits still defy logic. But they are not alone. In the same decade, private billionaires, men who rarely leave the warmth of yachts and towers, began funding Antarctic research ventures. Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos, and others were quietly granted limited access to remote territories under the guise of environmental data collection. Satellite logs reveal short visits, no announcements, and encrypted transmissions. When asked, Musk once joked online that the real alien base is under the ice. Perhaps it was humor, or perhaps it was a whisper slipped through laughter. If the Guardians truly exist, their patience must be unimaginable. They have allowed us to orbit the planet, to split the atom, to send machines to Mars. Yet they remain hidden. It suggests one of two things. Either they are indifferent, or they are waiting for something. Some theorists suggest they act only when humanity approaches the forbidden threshold, when exploration risks exposing their world or awakening their kind. That would explain the strange accidents that occur whenever new drilling projects go too deep or expeditions venture too far inland. It would also explain why modern satellites rarely capture clear data of the interior. Perhaps the Guardians don't destroy intruders, they erase evidence, bending the fabric of perception itself. Still, a few accounts speak of contact. In 1995, a geologist claimed to have heard a voice while alone during a blizzard near Dome Sea. It wasn't a sound, he said, but a thought pressed into his mind. Leave it buried. He fled his post the next day and never returned. Maybe the Guardians are not beings of flesh and bone. Maybe they are manifestations, projections of something deeper, born from the Earth's consciousness, the living memory of the planet itself. Every ancient tradition speaks of the Earth as alive, aware, and protective. Perhaps the Guardians are how it dreams of its own defense. If that sounds impossible, remember this. So did the idea of an ice wall in 1841, until Ross saw it with his own eyes. So did the notion of glowing crafts in 1947, until sailors swore they saw them rise from the snow. History is not built from what we believe. It's built from what refuses to die, no matter how many times it's buried. And somewhere beneath the frozen crust of our world, something ancient still refuses to die. It watches, it guards, and it waits for us to remember that the edge of the world might not be where the maps end. It might be where we begin to listen. They say that every mystery leaves fingerprints, small, inconsistent traces scattered across time, waiting for those obsessed enough to follow them. When it comes to Antarctica, those fingerprints are cold and deliberate. Blurred satellite tiles, censored flight logs, sealed archives, and an ocean of environmental protection clauses that sound more like the vocabulary of containment than conservation. The ice wall Guardians may not officially exist, but their shadow touches everything connected to the frozen South. By the 1970s, Antarctica had become the most tightly monitored region on Earth. Research stations multiplied, but access was still strangled by rules that seemed strangely overprotective. Every sample, every photograph, every step was documented and approved. It was as if the scientists themselves were being studied. In 1978, a Soviet engineer stationed at Vostok Base wrote a line in his log that was later confiscated but leaked through memory. "We are the experiment, not the explorers." He described hearing mechanical vibrations under the ice, steady, rhythmic, like engines buried far below. Weeks later, the Soviet team reported a series of tremors beneath their camp. Official reports blamed ice settling. The engineer called it movement. Throughout the 1980s, both American and Soviet satellite data showed sudden heat blooms across the continent, brief flashes of warmth appearing in areas believed to be solid ice. The readings were ignored publicly, but in declassified documents decades later, phrases like thermal anomaly, transient, and subsurface energy event appear repeatedly. When combined, these incidents outline a pattern, a pulse that beats from beneath the trans-Antarctic mountains, as if something massive and alive were adjusting itself. Even stranger were the human stories that emerged. In 1983, a Chilean base reported an unidentified object hovering silently above the horizon for nearly 10 minutes. No sound, no trail, just light bending around a shape too defined to be natural. Radio contact with nearby stations failed during the sighting, returning only when the object vanished. The next morning, snow around the camp appeared crystallized into geometric patterns, circles intersecting triangles, like ancient sigils carved in frost. Scientists labeled it a rare ice formation, but the photos were classified the same day. Those geometric marks appeared again decades later, in 2012, near a private expedition's abandoned campsite. The group, led by a wealthy adventurer from Norway, had gone off-route to explore an unmapped crevasse. They vanished without a distress call. When rescuers arrived, tents were still pitched, food untouched, electronics fried, as if struck by an electromagnetic pulse. Only one note was found, written in pencil on a torn map. They warned us. To skeptics, such tales are psychological breakdowns under isolation. But when identical symbols and compass malfunctions occur across generations, coincidence starts to lose its grip. The Guardians seem to leave no evidence, yet they leave patterns, as though the ice itself remembers every trespass. Then there's the technology question. Those who believe in the Guardians claim their power isn't supernatural, it's engineered. They may wield forms of energy manipulation that modern physics can barely describe. Consider the consistent reports of compasses spinning, of radios dying, of storms forming seconds after sighting. These could be forms of electromagnetic control, weather modulation, or sound-based deterrence. Technologies rumored to exist in secret military programs, but executed here with precision beyond human reach. There's an unsettling symmetry in how human governments behave when faced with something they can't control. Instead of denial, they mimic. In the 1990s, several patents appeared in U.S. and Russian archives describing directed acoustic deterrent systems, ionized atmospheric manipulation devices, and field cloaking technologies. Each was dismissed as theoretical. But to those who read between the lines, they looked like reverse engineering attempts, primitive echoes of what the Guardians had already mastered. If imitation is the sincerest form of fear, then humanity's obsession with Antarctica betrays a quiet terror. We're not trying to understand the Guardians. We're trying to become them. The deeper you look, the more the timeline fractures. In 2004, a group of international scientists drilled into ice cores near Dome Fuji to study prehistoric air bubbles. What they found wasn't air. It was something else entirely. Inside one segment was a dark material, glassy and metallic, that refracted light in ways impossible for natural ice. It was sent for analysis to a secure lab in Japan. The results were never published, but months later, the lab suffered a sudden fire. The data vanished. Conspiracy forums called it the Shard Incident. Those who examined leaked photos claimed the object was a fragment of technology, not geology, possibly a piece of armor or craft frozen for millennia. That same year, NASA satellites recorded a brief but powerful energy burst from the Antarctic interior. It wasn't seismic. It wasn't solar. It was directional, like a signal sent upward into space. The agency called it cosmic ray interference. But the burst's coordinates matched the same region where the shard had been discovered. Whatever message was sent, we weren't the intended recipients. And so the myth keeps folding over itself. The Guardians are said to be ancient beings, yet evidence hints at a technology that transcends ours. They act like sentinels, yet their silence feels like restraint, not hostility. Perhaps they're not protecting something hidden beneath the ice, but maintaining the ice itself, a living barrier engineered to seal away a deeper world. Theories multiply. That Antarctica is a vault holding pre-human artifacts, that it's a planetary defense system, or that it's the outer shell of a civilization still pulsing beneath the crust, waiting for the right cosmic alignment to reawaken. The idea sounds absurd until you realize how much of Antarctica remains unseen. More than 98% of the continent is unexplored, covered by ice thicker than the height of skyscrapers. Underneath lie mountain ranges as large as the Alps, valleys deeper than the Grand Canyon, and lakes sealed off from sunlight for millions of years. If life can survive in those conditions, and it does, then who can truly say what else hides there? One British climatologist once remarked that studying Antarctica felt like listening to a heartbeat through a wall. He didn't know how right he was. In 2017, an expedition to map subglacial lakes recorded rhythmic vibrations at precise intervals every 108 minutes. That same duration corresponds to the orbit time of early Soviet satellites, and curiously, to the rotation of certain magnetic storms detected near the poles. Patterns repeat like language, waiting to be decoded. Maybe the Guardians speak in frequency, not words. Maybe they have been talking all along, but we never learned how to listen. Sometimes at night, when solar winds ripple through the upper atmosphere, the sky above Antarctica glows with shifting lights, auroras so bright they turn the snow to liquid emerald. Pilots call it the curtain. Locals call it the watcher's breath. And every so often, hidden within that curtain, there appears a shape. Massive, slow, almost humanoid, outlined in green fire before fading back into darkness. Could that be a trick of light? Probably. But maybe not. Maybe that's how the Guardians remind us they're still here, holding their post at the planet's final frontier. Not to invade, not to conquer, simply to make sure we never forget the limits of where we're allowed to go. Because some borders are not political, nor natural. They are sacred. Perhaps the Guardians are not relics of the past, but warnings of the future. A glimpse of what humanity becomes when it finally learns restraint. Or perhaps they are the very reason we have never found proof of gods, of aliens, of paradise itself. Maybe they are all of it at once, the myth, the machine, and the memory of a world before ours. And if that's true, then Antarctica is not a wasteland of ice. It is a mirror, one that shows us what watches back when we stare too long into the unknown. By the time the 21st century arrived, the legend of the Ice Wall Guardians had evolved into something halfway between folklore and classified intelligence. To some, they were spirits of the earth, primordial beings sculpted by the planet itself. To others, they were the remnants of an ancient civilization whose technology survived the last cataclysm. But a new generation, raised on digital leaks and satellite imagery, began to see them differently, not as myth, but as evidence. In a world drowning in information, What's hidden begins to feel deliberate, and nothing is hidden more carefully than Antarctica. The deeper investigators looked, the stranger the patterns became. Amateur researchers traced coordinates of blurred satellite patches, discovering that many of them formed geometric shapes, hexagons and circles spaced with mathematical precision. These weren't random sensor bars. They looked like markers of alignment, as though something beneath the surface followed a design too vast to see from the ground. When compared to magnetic anomaly maps, the alignments matched perfectly. Whatever lived or slept under the ice wasn't scattered. It was organized. Governments, of course, denied everything. But denial itself began to look suspicious. In 2018, a private company attempting to launch a weather monitoring satellite was abruptly denied orbital clearance for national security reasons. Their planned imaging route? Directly over the Antarctic interior. That same month, a New Zealand journalist investigating military supply chains to McMurdo Station went missing. Her final dispatch mentioned freight labeled as biological containment arriving from Chile. Officially, she froze during a storm. Unofficially, her files vanished from every network within hours of her disappearance. Then came the whistleblowers, former technicians, scientists, and soldiers, each telling fragments of the same story. A maintenance worker claimed to have serviced power conduits that ran deeper than any base schematic allowed. A pilot described being forced to divert when radar showed something immense moving under the ice, leaving pressure waves like a surfacing whale the size of a city. A medical officer spoke of autopsies performed on organic matter that did not match any known DNA catalog. All of them signed lifetime non-disclosure agreements. All of them vanished from public view. In the corners of the internet, where official narratives never reach, people began stitching these accounts together. They built a portrait of the Guardians not as individuals, but as a species, or perhaps a system. According to the synthesis, they were once surface dwellers, giant beings who ruled a pre-human Earth, driven underground by a catastrophe so immense it reset civilization itself. Their bodies adapted, their technology merged with the environment, and over millennia they became indistinguishable from the ice they guarded. In this view, the Guardians are not protecting a secret. They are the secret, the living memory of a world before ours. Evidence, if it exists, hides in plain sight. Consider the energy readings captured by seismic instruments since the early 2000s. In 2006, a pulse of low-frequency sound emanated from beneath the Weddell Sea, lasting 7 minutes and echoing as far as South Africa. The tone was too deep to be geological. Oceanographers labeled it the bloop, attributing it to shifting ice plates. Yet when the data was analyzed, the sound carried harmonic structure, something only produced by biological resonance or deliberate modulation. Whatever made it, it wasn't ice cracking. It was singing. That same year, the U.S. Navy quietly updated its Antarctic operation manuals to include new emergency procedures for environmental acoustic interference. The description matched the bloop almost perfectly. Coincidence or precaution? The manuals were classified the following year. Even popular culture began to reflect the unease. Films, novels, and online series started weaving Antarctica into their apocalyptic mythos, as if storytelling was humanity's unconscious attempt to process something it already sensed. From alien outposts to buried temples, the imagery repeated like a dream the species couldn't forget. It's as though we're trying to remember something we once witnessed, something the Guardians erased from memory, but not from instinct. Still, the deeper question remains, if these beings exist, what do they want? Every account of contact describes the same pattern: intervention only when humans approach forbidden zones. They don't attack cities, they don't claim land, they simply maintain distance. That restraint suggests purpose. The Guardians are not conquerors. They're caretakers of a fragile balance we barely understand. Maybe they're ensuring the survival of something beneath, something that could never coexist with us. Or maybe they're preventing a mistake we've made before, one that once destroyed a world we don't remember as ours. What if our myths of Atlantis, Lemuria, and Hyperborea are not separate stories, but distorted retellings of one event? The last time humans breached the boundary the Guardians protect? Flood myths from every culture describe gods punishing mankind for uncovering forbidden knowledge. The Sumerians called it the Tablets of Destinies. The Greeks called it Prometheus's fire. The Bible called it Eden. Perhaps each story is a fossilized echo of the same ancient warning, that knowledge without wisdom invites extinction. Modern science, ironically, may be approaching the same frontier once more. Climate change is melting Antarctica's ice faster than any time in recorded history. As the ice retreats, ancient structures begin to surface. Mountain peaks that appear carved, symmetrical ridges that mimic architecture. Geologists dismiss them as natural formations. But if the Guardians are real, what happens when we uncover what they've spent millennia concealing? What if the melt itself isn't a natural cycle, but a countdown? Imagine it. As the world warms, something buried awakens. The pulses detected by seismographs grow stronger, not weaker. Ice doesn't just collapse, it breathes. Maybe the Guardian's silence has never been indifference. Maybe it's patience. They could be waiting for us to trigger the final sequence, when curiosity burns through restraint, when the last layer of ice is gone, and the old world re-emerges. Some theorists think that day is near. In 2022, NASA's satellites recorded a strange circular vortex forming over the South Pole, an atmospheric anomaly with a perfect geometric shape. Mainstream scientists blamed air pressure patterns, but the anomaly's core emitted frequencies similar to the bloop. The pattern repeated exactly 1 year later, almost to the day. If these are signals, they are not random. They are a countdown disguised as coincidence, and when the numbers align, when the orbit, vibration, and temperature converge, something will happen. Some say it will be a revelation. Others say it will be a reckoning. There's a quiet irony here. Humanity has always sought the unknown, believing discovery is progress. Yet what if the unknown has been watching us the whole time, guiding how much we're allowed to see? Maybe we didn't invent exploration. We were invited to it, slowly, like children being taught not to run towards the fire. The Guardians may not speak, but their message has been the same since the first ice wall rose before Sir James Clark Ross. This far, and no further. And so the myth endures, because it must. The governments deny, the scientists hesitate, the satellites blur, but the world keeps dreaming of the white horizon where maps end. Perhaps deep down, we already know the truth. The Guardians are not legends. They are inevitability, the planet's immune system, the keepers of balance between what is known and what should remain forgotten. When night falls on the Ross ice shelf and the aurora flickers like a slow heartbeat, something moves far beyond human eyes. A ripple crosses the snow, and a shape rises, watching the horizon as if measuring the arrogance of the species that calls itself the crown of creation. The figure stands still, made of light and frost, silent as eternity. Somewhere in that endless expanse, the wind whispers across the ice, not words but a feeling. Remember. Because in the end, the wall was never meant to keep us out. It was meant to keep something in, and maybe, when the last layer of ice melts, we'll finally understand what that something was. But by then, understanding might come too late.